My name's Bruce Watson, and I somehow drew the short straw to be the MC for this afternoon. But it is actually an honour, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But I want to thank you all for coming. The gentleman that's presenting today is the godfather of film and audio archiving in Australia, really. Dr. Ray Edmonson. He's the chair of the Friends of the National Film and Sound Archives. He did work as, I think the title was Deputy Director within the archives for many years. And he's a pioneer of film and sound archiving in Australia and recognised around the world for his contribution. And he's the National Film and Sound Archives Curator Emeritus, which is an absolutely fantastic title to have. And very well deserved, I'm sure. So, without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Ray. Thanks, Ray.
Thanks, Bruce. What I'm going to do is to run through my PowerPoint, which has some audio and video clips in it. I apologise in advance if some of them don't work the way they're supposed to. I actually haven't done an online PowerPoint like this before. It's my first attempt at it, so I'll just go straight into it and commentate on the slides as we go, and then if there's questions to ask, or things to talk about at the end, happy to chat on about that. So here we go. I need to now share my screen. Everything in this presentation has been downloaded from free sources like YouTube and the NFSA website. Excuse me, and may be available on CDs that are easy to purchase. So if you want to see the full versions of any of the Laurel and Hardy films that I mention, you can search for them on YouTube and they'll be there. So the context of this presentation is restoration and reconstruction, and that's the work that's done by audiovisual archives and others to reassemble the past and bring it alive for the present, to encourage research and take a piece of audiovisual history and open it up in new ways. For example, the NFSA has been involved in the Project Australia in Colour, which has run on SBS and two seasons of it, which has been putting footage forward from 1896 into a historical narrative and electronically colorising it, that is, artificially adding colour to the original black and white footage. The concept is not new. And it's a controversial method archivally, and it's not a subject I'm going to get into this afternoon, but it does present material in a form that today's audiences want to see it. They want to see it in colour. The NFSA and others have revived old technologies like acoustic cylinder sound recording from the early days of the 20th century to capture newer performances using the sound spectrum of a bygone age. You can see Keith Potker of the Seekers in there, making a recording on Edison cylinder at the archive, and this recording is on the NFSA website if you search for it. Now it's also digitised fading colour film and boosted colour values from films so that can be seen in the original colour palette. A recent example of that was The Getting of Wisdom, among several films of the relatively recent decades that the archive has restored. It's also reconstructed silent classics like Sentimental Bloke and For the Term of His Natural Life from multiple sources, and added both authentic period music tracks or more modern musical interpretations to them. The most recent exercise in this area was another reconstruction of The Sentimental Bloke with new music. Now remember, silent films weren't silent. They were accompanied by live musicians in the cinema playing appropriate mood music. And today there are entire film festivals whose purpose is to present silent films with musical accompaniments to modern audiences, and archives like the NFSA present films in their cinemas in this way as well. I don't know whether you've seen this film in the last few years, Stan Rolly. It's the outcome of what archives have spent decades doing, preserving original films and documents and encouraging an awareness and interest in our cinematic heritage, undertaking restoration and evoking the past. If you've seen this film, I think you have been impressed, like I was, with the central characterizations, performances that could only be possible through a detailed familiarity with the original films, meticulous attention to period detail, and an admiration for Laurel and Hardy themselves. This film is based on Laurel and Hardy's final personal appearance tour in Britain in 1953-54. A sick man, Hardy died in 1957. Laurel died in 1965, enjoying his final years crafting Laurel and Hardy gags as if the team was still active. Let's have a look at the trailer.
Camera set. Okay, back projection. Cue music. And action!
Hollywood legends Mr. Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy arrived in Britain today as they embarked on a national tour.
We're doing this while we're waiting for this new picture to come together.
I'm going to make sure that this tour gets off on the right foot.
There it is, the Eiffel Tower.
It's amazing that you two are still going strong. Still using the same old material.
Here they are.
Such a wonderful reception, isn't it, Ida?
It's okay.
2 double acts for the price of 1.
Pretty empty last night. I guess people just don't want to see Laurel and Hardy anymore.
Has he been pushing you a little too hard, babe?
You know, Stan.
You could have said goodbye, Oliver, a long time ago.
We had a good thing going, but you had this big chip on your shoulder because I did a picture with someone else. I couldn't sleep for days when they told me what you did. You're just a lazy ass who got lucky because you met me. Lucky to spend my life with a man who hides behind his typewriter. You betrayed me. Betrayed our friendship. You're hollow.
You cannot go on stage again in your condition.
I love you, but I won't stand by and watch this nutty tour put you in a wooden box.
I should never have had us take this tour. I love him, Ida. You're not leaving, are you, Stan? The show must go on. When you watch our movies, it was just the two of us. All we had was each other. Je ne regrette rien. And you shouldn't regret rien either.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Stan Laurel and Mr. Oliver Hardy.
I'll miss us when we're gone. So will you.
Camera set.
So it's in that context that I want to take you through a unique project started by a group of researchers and musicians in the Netherlands in the 1980s, 1990s that relate to Laurel and Hardy's best-known films with the musical backing that gave them a special flavour. Almost certainly the music won't be new to you, even if the familiarity is subliminal. You might wonder, where have I heard that tune before? You will never have seen the name of the composer, Leroy Shield, in any film credits. And the fact that you can today hear the music in its own right is due to an orchestra which has named itself after a Laurel and Hardy short film from 1931 called Beau Hunks. But so I don't get ahead of myself, I'd like to begin the story at Hollywood's Hal Roach Studios in the late 1920s. Hal Roach started producing films with his friend Harold Lloyd in 1915. He established a large studio in Culver City, California in the 1920s. He built a roster of comedy stars and series featuring Will Rogers, the Our Gang Kids, Charlie Chase, Harry Langdon, Thelma Todd, Zazu Pitts, Lupe Velez, Patsy Kelly, and most famously, Laurel and Hardy. He was a major rival to Hollywood's other great fun factory, the Mack Sennett Studio. Roach released his films through Pathé Exchange until 1927, when he went to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. He converted his silent movie studio to sound in late 1928 and began releasing talking shorts in early 1929. In the days before dubbing, foreign language versions of the Roach comedies were created by reshooting each film in the Spanish, French, and sometimes Italian and German languages. Laurel and Hardy, Charlie Chase, and Our Gang Kids, some of whom had barely begun school, were required to recite the foreign dialogue phonetically, often working from blackboards hidden off camera. Roach and Sennett specialised in shorts rather than feature films. Shorts were then a central feature of cinema programming. So, what do we mean by shorts? In the 1920s and later, and unlike today, cinema programs comprised 1 or 2 feature films and a selection of short subjects, usually 1 or 2 reels in length. A reel was a standard unit of 1,000 feet of film, about 10 to 15 minutes. Newsreels and cartoons were one-reelers. Comedies were usually 2 reels. Because they were short, the plots could be fairly simple. Long-running series, like the Laurel and Hardy films or Our Gang, allowed the central actors to develop their characterizations over time, so the public got to know them, almost like old friends. This was certainly the case with Laurel and Hardy. Arthur Stanley Jefferson was born in 1890 in Ulverston, Lancashire. He was one of 5 children, and his parents were active in the theatre. His boyhood hero was Dan Leno, one of the greatest English music hall comedians. With a natural affinity for the theatre, Laurel gave his first professional performance on stage at the Panopticon in Glasgow at the age of 16, where he polished his skills at pantomime and the music hall sketches. It was the music hall from where he drew his standard comic devices, including his bowler hat and nonsensical understatement. He joined Fred Karno's troupe of actors in 1910 with the stage name of Stan Jefferson. The troupe also included a young Charlie Chaplin. He acted as Chaplin's understudy for some time. Karno was a pioneer of slapstick, and in his biography, Laurel stated, "Fred Karno didn't teach Charlie Chaplin and me all we know about comedy. He just taught us most of it." Chaplin and Laurel arrived in the United States on the same ship from Britain and with the Karno troupe and toured the country. He gravitated from stage to film, adopting the stage name Laurel. Among other performers, Laurel worked briefly alongside Oliver Hardy in the silent film short The Lucky Dog in 1921, before the two were a team. He was paid $75 a week to star in a series of 12 solo two-reel comedies in 1924-25 for the Joe Rock studio, before moving to Hal Roach as a director. Norvell Hardy was born in Harlem, Georgia in 1892, the youngest of 5 children. His father died when he was only 1 year old, and as a teenager he adopted his father's first name as a tribute. The nickname Babe was acquired in childhood. He had little interest in formal education, although he acquired an early interest in music and theatre. He joined a theatrical troupe and later ran away from a boarding school near Atlanta to sing with the group. His mother recognised his talent for singing and sent him to Atlanta to study music and voice. His light tenor voice was later to feature in many of his films. In 1910, he became the projectionist / manager / ticket taker and janitor of a local picture theatre and was thereafter hooked on movies. In 1914, he made his first film, Outwitting Dad, at the Lubin studio, and over the next few years he freelanced, appearing in about 100 films, variously as a comedian, a heavy or a villain, including in Lucky Dog with Stan Laurel. He gravitated to Hollywood and Roach Studios in 1924 and joined Roach's All-Stars comedy company. It was here that he crossed paths with Laurel and they became personal friends. Now, although he had joined Roach as a director and writer, Laurel was persuaded to go back in front of the camera as part of the Comedy All-Stars group. It was Roach's supervising director, Leo McCary, who observed the dynamic between Laurel and Hardy in the All-Stars comedies, and he suggested Roach put them in their own series. Putting Pants on Philip in 1927 was the first official Laurel and Hardy comedy, and they played the same characters for the rest of their careers. Laurel was the comic mastermind of the team and the unofficial director of their films. Well, at the end of the day, Babe and Hardy went off to play golf or go to the racecourse. Stan stayed back at the studio, devising gags and polishing the script. Their golden age was the 1930s. The critics never liked them. It was said that no one liked Laurel and Hardy except the public. but their fame was global. During the decade, they graduated naturally from shorts to feature films. They left Roach in 1940 to seek greater financial security and creative control, and they moved to 20th Century Fox and MGM to make 8 more features. They were disappointed. At Roach, they were big fish in a small pond. Not so at the major studios, where they took the scripts they were given and did things the studio way. Apart from a final and ill-fated independent production in 1951 called Utopia, they made no more films, turning to personal appearance tours instead. Okay, by 1929, Hal Roach had a problem. Like all other producers, he had to convert to the new fashion of talking pictures. This meant a change in production methods as well as personnel. Many silent actors could not adapt to the new medium, and their careers declined, as their voices did not suit their screen personas. Fortunately, the reverse was true for Laurel and Hardy. The talkies actually gave depth to the characters they played. Nevertheless, Roach's early sound films were awkward in style, and the dialogue had to compete with the surface noise of the primitive soundtrack. Between bursts of dialogue and live sounds, you became uncomfortably aware of the noise. Let me illustrate this with the second Our Gang sound short from 1929. Okay, I think you get the picture. Talkies were replacing silent movies, but in doing so, they were losing an important aspect of the silent cinema. Silent movies weren't really silent. From earliest days, it was realised that adding a musician with a piano would distract attention from the noise of the projector, as well as enhancing the story on the screen with some mood music. Be it a chase, a love scene, a mysterioso, a storm, or so on. By the 1920s, this was an art form. And city cinemas had live orchestras to do this. A case in point is For the Term of His Natural Life in 1927, which the NFSA reconstructed with authentic music and orchestration. Here's a sample. Roach reasoned that if he could adapt the silent movie music technique and lay some incidental but unsynchronized background music under the dialogue, it would distract the ear from the surface noise of the track and enhance the general effect of each scene. So he turned to his technology providers, the Victor Talking Machine Company, for help, and they sent him their itinerant musical director, Leroy Shield. What he came up with helped to invent the craft of film composition. He composed stock background music which was not key to the action on screen but complemented it, and it masked the soundtrack noise. It was unintrusive and not meant to be noticed, but it added energy. During an intensive period in 1930-31, and again later in the later 1930s, Shield wrote about 100 tunes and cues. He did the orchestrations and supervised their recording. It formed a library of stock music from which directors and editors could select and patch together scene by scene. The music was never released in its own right. It simply was kept on film loops in a replay machine and drawn on whenever needed. In time, this master material was lost as production methods changed. Because the Laurel and Hardy shorts had a very long life, the music became very familiar to generations of moviegoers and later television viewers. Roach's film library found its way onto television around the world. In Australia, both the Laurel and Hardy and Our Gang and Little Rascals shorts were staples of the early years of television in the 1950s and 60s, when so much local programming was reliant on the accumulated backlog of the Hollywood studios. It was catchy music, but you could only hear it in these films, and it was always overlaid with dialogue, so you couldn't enjoy the music on its own, but you never forgot it. Cartoonist Robert Crumb was one who got attached to it.
Walking in here and you turn that thing on and you heard that music, it just immediately just grabs your ear. Incredible. Shield's music, I'm sure, was the thing that first got me interested in old music. I was hearing those when I was a kid on TV. Yeah. And I searched for that music, from my childhood to the time that I, discovered the old 78s and that there was similar music on those old records. That was a real revelation. Walking in here.
To illustrate the effect, here are some sound grabs from 2 Laurel and Hardy shorts, County Hospital and the Laurel and Hardy murder case. I'm not showing you the vision, just try and listen to the background music rather than the dialogue.
Oh, what can I do for you?
I'd like to see Mr. Hardy. Oliver Norval Hardy.
Room 14, next to the solarium.
Come in. How do you feel? Fine. I didn't expect to see you here today. Well, I didn't have anything else to do, so I thought I'd drop in and see you. Thank you. You're welcome. What have you got there? I brought you some hard-boiled eggs and some nuts.
Now, you know I can't eat hard-boiled eggs and nuts. If you wanted to bring me something, why didn't you bring me a box of candy?
Well, they cost too much.
Well, what has that got to do with it?
You didn't pay me for the last box I brought you. Have one?
No, I'd rather not. Hard-boiled eggs and nuts. Don't put your hand in there. I have to drink that water. You had nothing else to do, so you thought you'd come around and see me. Here I was for the first time in my life, having a nice, peaceful time. And you had to come and spoil it. Hard-boiled eggs and nuts. Is your father and mother's name Laurel?
Sure, why?
Did you ever have any relatives? Where were you born?
I don't know.
Fancy not knowing where you were born.
Well, I was too young to remember. How do I know where I was born?
Didn't you once tell me that you had an uncle?
Sure, I've got an uncle. Why?
Now we're getting someplace. Is he living?
No. He fell through a trapdoor and broke his neck.
Was he building a house?
No, they were hanging him.
This little montage illustrates the problem of trying to hear a complete piece without overlaid dialogue. The only way was to patch together bits of several films.
Sí, señor.
Buenos días, señor Hardy.
Upstairs. Third door on the left.
Well, it appears that our boyfriend never heard of any other place.
Isn't this
except-
my house? It certainly is not.
Shield's music was publicly familiar, but it had never been commercially released, and the original recordings and scores were presumed lost. In the mid-1980s, Piet Schroeder, a Dutch graphic designer and radio programmer, began assembling a tape library of Hal Roach comedy themes transferred directly from the soundtrack of VHS tapes. Because the films contained dialogue and sound effects which in places obscures the music, Schroeder's isolated fragments of themes without dialogue or sound effects and edited them into complete, uninterrupted versions. Luckily, each song was used so many times that it was theoretically possible, given enough time and patience, to splice each song together. Using these reconstructed recordings, Schroeder's worked closely with transcribers and arrangers Peter Stove, Jan Robbins, Robert Veen and Menno Dames to perfect written charts to accurately reflect the music heard in the films. Musicians who are style specialists, that is, people who collect and play old instruments, came together to try to recreate the original sound. And it wasn't just a matter of having the right instruments and the right performance. It was trying to simulate the lo-fi recording technology and techniques of the 1920s and 30s. The group called itself Bohunks, after the classic Laurel and Hardy short of 1931. Although there had been earlier but imperfect attempts by others to recreate Shield's music, the Bohunks, an ensemble of about 20 musicians, persevered and experimented to recreate the original 1930s sound. I won't go into technicalities, but they finally gave the stock music of Shield its due in a series of albums released between 1992 and 2000. The most popular of the releases was The Bohunks Play the Little Rascals music. So how successful were they? Well, to illustrate, here's Bohunks playing Shields' short piece Cops, followed by a soundtrack grab of the same film featuring the same piece, although in a different key, from Laurel and Hardy's 1932 short Scram. This first one is Bohunks. And now here's the original soundtrack piece.
Next case, Laurel and Hardy. Take off your hat. You're charged with vagrancy. Are you guilty or not guilty? Not guilty, Your Highness. On what ground? We went on the grounds. We were sleeping on a park bench. The jail wasn't full. I'd give you both 180 days. Inasmuch as the jail is full, I'm going to give you both just 1 hour. Thank you, sir. To get out of town. And never let me set eyes on you again. Case dismissed. Does that mean we can go back and sleep on the park bench? Scram, or I'll build a jail for you. Next.
So let's hear a selection of Bohunks' renditions. This tune, In My Canoe, is heard in several films, including under the opening titles of Another Fine Mess in 1930, where the technical credits are actually recited by two girls in usherette outfits, a device Roach experimented with in a few films. This was the first Laurel and Hardy film to feature Shields tunes. This waltz appears in the opening scene of Pardon Us in 1931 as the boys approach a malt and hop store. Hardy copies a recipe for beer from the window and decides that for $18.06 they can make 15 gallons of bootleg brew. Remember that in 1931 Prohibition was still in force. The music also turns up in the same year in Roach shorts featuring Charlie Chase and Thelma Todd. This was written for the marital comedy Our Wife in 1931. It was later used in several other Roach shorts. Laurel and Hardy travelled to Scotland as stowaways on a cattle boat, where Laurel, as Stanley McLaurel, believes he is heir to his grandfather's fortune. As it turns out, Laurel has been bequeathed only a set of bagpipes and a snuff container. Receiving an ad for a tailor's offer of a new suit, Laurel and Hardy accidentally go to the wrong floor and join a Scottish regiment of the British Army and travel to India, where they frequently run afoul of their Sergeant Major, Jimmy Finlayson, who appeared in many of their shorts, and help their friend Alan to reunite with his love and Laurel's cousin, Lorna McLaurel. This is a later composition by Shields with a larger orchestra. The theme covers the transitioning scene halfway through the film from Scotland to India. Shields wrote what I call music cues, not complete melodies, but short mood or dramatic transitions, and here are 4 of them. This is the funeral march. Now here's a short fanfare effect, first used in Bigger and Better, 1930. This cue is widely used in many films, mostly near the end of the second reel. And Interlude, the last composition by Shield, written for Our Gang Follies in 1938. This is one of Shield's best remembered melodies. It was first used to open Me and My Pal in 1933 and regularly as an opener in their subsequent shorts up to 1935. While onto the show promises good times to come, Good Old Days remembers good times gone by. It was first used in the prison schoolroom scene in Pardonus in 1931, and it was then repurposed as the theme song for Roach's Our Gang shorts. Perhaps it's that association that transport listeners back to their childhood, nostalgic and sweet but not saccharine. Now here are two renditions. The first is by Bo Hunks, then an original soundtrack from 1936, both complete with the MGM Lion. How close are they? And now here's an original. Now we'll leave our gang at that point and look at one of Laurel and Hardy's best loved shorts in its entirety, County Hospital. This gets the full Shields treatment throughout. See if you can follow the music.
I'd like to see Mr. Hardy. Oliver Noble Hardy.
Room 14. Next to the solarium.
Thank you, Doctor.
Did you wish to see someone?
I want to see Mr. Hardy.
Oh, he's in room 14 on the top floor.
Could you tell me where room 14 is, please?
Right down to the end of the hall.
Is that the room next to the aquarium?
Aquarium? Oh, you mean the solarium.
Come in. How do you feel? Fine. I didn't expect to see you here today. Well, I didn't have anything else to do, so I thought I'd drop in and see you. Thank you. You're welcome. What have you got there? I brought you some hard-boiled eggs and some nuts.
Now, you know I can't eat hard-boiled eggs and nuts. If you wanted to bring me something, why didn't you bring me a box of candy?
They cost too much.
Well, what has that got to do with it?
You didn't pay me for the last box I brought you. Have one?
No, I'd rather not. Hard-boiled eggs and nuts. Don't put your hand in there. I have to drink that water. My little patient today?
Just fine, thank you, Doctor. This is my friend, Mr. Laurel.
I hope I find you well.
Thank you, ma'am.
Miss Smith, give this to the patient in room 22. Yes, ma'am.
How long do you think I'll be in here, Doctor?
Oh, at least a couple of months.
Gee, that's great. This is the first time in my life I've had such a wonderful rest.
Nothing else to do. So you thought you'd come around and see me. Here I was for the first time in my life, having a nice, peaceful time. And you had to come and spoil it. Get my clothes. Hard-boiled eggs and nuts. You know you can't get them over that foot. Get the scissors and cut the leg off. The leg of the pants. Oh. Get me the scissors. Hind to front.
Congratulations, Hardy, old thing. The doctor says I may go home.
That's great. I'm going home, too.
How perfectly ripping.
Give me those scissors. Oh.
I won't suffer. Hardy, old bean, what do you think?
What?
I have on your trousers by mistake. Oh, I say.
Excuse me. Miss Wallace, will you refill this, please? The visitor in room 14 sat on it.
He'll sleep for a month.
Wait a minute. I'll drive. Wait a minute. I'll stay right here. Oh. Come on, let's get home.
Shield was not always pleased at how his music was used in the Roach films. He realised that his prolific output, by definition, restricted the need for him to keep composing. Although he did sometimes write music for specific scenes, it was also added to the library which sound editors simply used over and over. He probably wrote himself out of a job. Shield moved to radio in 1931 and had a long and impressive musical career. He died in 1962. But perhaps the Bohunks recordings are at last revealing him as a major American film composer. While Bernard Herrmann and Max Steiner scored feature films, Shield happened to do his best work in the unglamorous field of two-reel comedies, and by the nature of what was required of him, each new theme was a self-contained entity. To quote Piet Schroeders, his music usually leaves the listener with the happy feeling that this is how a tune should go, which makes even the sad tunes sound happy.
Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to just unmute and ask it. Well, everybody's been very quiet, so I will, I guess, make a comment, I guess, more than a question, Ray. I was interested in that issue of the low fidelity of the Bohunks recordings, and I guess I didn't feel they were quite low fidelity enough. The frequency response range was too wide.
Yep.
And some of the, like the harmonics of the brass in particular, really stood out. And when you did those really interesting exercises of comparing their recordings to the original ones, they were, much more present, which means that they had a much wider frequency response. So, have you got any comment about that?
I think they've tried very hard to match the original. It may not be possible to exactly do it now because the actual gear, the microphones and the original microphone just don't exist any longer, or not in a usable condition. So they had to do the best they could with modern equipment. I think they placed the musicians in a way that they would have been placed for a sound recording session at the time, and not as you would do it now. I think they did that kind of thing as carefully as possible, and they've tried to bring the range down as far as possible. But yes, I mean, I can tell the difference. But I think the scoring and the choice of instruments is probably as exact as you could get.
Yeah,
but yes,
I agree.
But it is not completely low fidelity, no.
Yeah. Yeah. I was also really, I must admit, I found it very hard watching the county hospital to concentrate on the music.
Yes.
Which is perhaps, it's actually that's a praise of the music and its function in film. But one of the things that struck me in the audio, apart from the music, was the various sound effects. I felt that either the Foley artist had a really heavy hand, or whoever engineered it, like when somebody put something down, or when there was some sort of noise that a Foley artist would have created, it was really loud.
Yes.
I found that interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say about it, but I just found that quite interesting.
Well, again, I think I don't know, for the early films, early 30s, I don't know how much actual sound mixing after the event they could do. Look, I have in mind a film called The Lottery Bride. It's a Jenny MacDonald musical from 1929, which I've it's held at George Richmond House in New York, and I've used it in particular teaching contexts. And like our earliest Australian musicals, like His Royal Highness, the orchestra, you had a full-size orchestra playing live while the action was going on, because mixing as we know it now just wasn't possible. And so just how much they could sort of have music tracks and sound effects tracks and manipulate them in the early 30s is not clear at Roach. In Australia, Sydney Sound Review, if you look at old Sydney Sound Reviews and the first Ken Hall features, they couldn't mix sound and voice until maybe 34, 35.
Wow.
You can tell that from just watching the films. They just couldn't do mixing. Later on, of course, they could, but these are the things that had to be created in the late 20s, early 30s, as they worked out how to make sound films. And you would also notice in County Hospital that I was listening for surface noise, couldn't hear any, but by 1932, I'd say the soundtrack the sound technology had improved, so that there was less noise on the tracks than in 28, 29, because all those developments happened quite rapidly. But that was the craft of actually developing the making of sound films. If you look at accounts of making of the first Warner's film, like The Jazz Singer and so on, with sound, where a camera was packed inside a soundproof box, and it was incredibly stultifying. And setting up a scene to record, you had to place the microphone just so. The actors had to sit reasonably close to it. The camera was immovable. This all had to be figured out. It was figuring out movie making from scratch again. And so in that Our Gang short, when they in the railroad yard, I mean, filming kids in that location is something you would never be allowed to do now anyway. They didn't bother about that in 1928. And all that sound, but the voices and the noise of the engine was all happening live. So sounded terrible, but but enough of a novelty in 1928 to be acceptable. So.
Oh yeah, it's remarkable how quickly that all happened. When you think about a period of 10 years or so, when you think about the progress made in the last 10 years in terms of sound and film technology, it's not it was so fast in those early days.
Yeah, that was. But the stages you had to go through, and in Australia we did it maybe a bit slow, but with less resources than in America. But you can see the progression. First through trying sound on disc, and then at Cine Sound in 1931, 32, to get around the American patents, they had to figure out their own system. And so Arthur Smith, who was a radio engineer from Tasmania, worked out how to record sound on film without infringing the American patents, because the Americans had it all tied up. He worked out how to do this and created the Cine Sound system, and named the company after the sound system. And the early Cine soundtracks are actually superb to listen to, the clarity of the sound, but they couldn't mix, and that had to come a bit later. In Melbourne, at the same time, you had Frank Thring with FD Studios. He just paid the money and he bought the RCA system from America, and he just imported the technology, which would have been highly expensive. And so while Cine Sound were recording density soundtracks, RCA was a variable area soundtrack. Interesting just to look at them physically. Again, I'm not sure whether Thring was able to mix sound. It doesn't sound like it, because his musical, His Royal Highness, was all recorded live.
I just wanted to say, you mentioned the placement of the microphone. I refer you to Singing in the Rain. Remember that?
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah. I had to go out for just a moment, and I hope I didn't miss it, but I'm interested in the use of music and in the early Hal Roach days, in the context of what was happening overall in Hollywood.
I don't know. Look, I can't give you a good comparison. I don't know of any other short films of the period that used the same approach. Certainly you had early shorts with just had plain voices, but that kind of... I find it very melodious music, and that kind of music in the background I think was unique to Hal Roach. He kept using it, till I think the late 30s, and then they just moved on to writing specific scores for films. But and even then he reused stuff that the last two Laurel and Hardy features that he did use exactly the same theme music over the main titles, that he economised. But no, I can't really answer that, Martha. We have to look at some of the earliest shorts from the other studios and compare. But I have no recollection that any of them sounded at all like the Roach films.
I just want to mention that when I was young, they played Laurel and Hardy, films a lot.
Yeah.
And I loathed them. They were so violent for a young person, so terrifying. And so mean. But it was wonderful seeing them now.
Oh, they're very studied films, and it was Laurel who crafted the gags, and Hardy just sort of went along. And the two, he actually produced. In the background, he literally supervised the editing and the direction without actually getting credit for it. There were other directors who I'm sure did direct, but he kind of kept an eye on it. And at the end of the day's shoot, Hardy would go off to the golf course or something. He just wanted to finish and go off and go to the racetrack or the golf course or somewhere else. Laurel stayed behind, doing the editing, looking at the rushes, all this sort of stuff. He just that was all his work. And excuse me. Possibly the best of the Roach features was Way Out West, 1937, which was a Stan Laurel production. He just sort of produced the whole thing, and it's a beautifully crafted film with 3 musical interludes, which are wonderful to watch and listen to. Where, of course, in 2 of them, Hardy sings. He had a lovely voice, and something you never know from the silent films. But given the opportunity, they'd put in these places where he could sing, and he had a light tenor voice, which was very nice to listen to. So music was, in that sense, part of their films, and was certainly in all of the feature films. I think they had musical interludes where Hardy could sing.
That's interesting, because now that I think of it, there were a few comedians in those relatively early days who were filmmakers.
Yeah. Look, they were multi-talented. So as I mentioned earlier, Hardy really wanted to be a singer, but became an actor, and Laurel really wanted to be a director and a writer. And he was, and they both ended up in front of the screen, in front of the camera. And they, if you've seen the film Stan and Ollie, which I think is a lovely film, it's about their last music hall tour. They're in the 40s. They severed their connection with Roach. I think Roach was always niggly about what he paid them. They wanted a better deal, and so they formed their own company. But they didn't have the capital to finance films themselves, so they had to go to the major studios. They went to Fox and MGM, and they found that it didn't work for them. They were just plonked into the system. They no longer had creative freedom. They just had to do everything on schedule. They couldn't experiment. They had to rework some of their old gags and so on. And there's a marked drop in the quality of the films. The films, I think all Laurel and Hardy films are good, but you can see the difference. And they were very discouraged by their experience. They made 8 feature films for Fox and MGM, all of which are worth watching, but they're not of the same quality as the Roach films. And they finally gave up, did music hall tours. Their final film, Utopia, was a disaster, and it took about 2 years to make, and everything went wrong. And it was made by a French company, and Stan became very ill during the production, and he looks absolutely terrible, and so that detracts from the film. And yet there are still good things in it, clever things. So there's an international fan club called Sons of the Desert, which is based on one of their films is called Sons of the Desert. It's about a lodge, you know. And so it's an international fan club, and so there are tents in different countries. I think some tents in Australia. Never been in touch with them, but and so they just have meetings. They run the films, they discuss them, and it's, you know, they just kind of have an ongoing life. The films are so good, and they just had that ongoing appeal. And they never became rich people. They were never poor, but they never became rich. And of course, it was the producers who made money out of their films. Roach made a fortune out of them. So did MGM. But the deals they did at the time didn't allow them the kind of return they were getting. When on television, of course, they got nothing. So, but the original studios did. But that's so often the way. So they, but I can never get tired of watching them. So obviously, a lot of other people don't get tired either. And but I do have an affection for, I guess, the Roach films in general, and the 30s films in general as well, because it was such a formative period, and I'd like to analyse, you know, how they were made.
Ray, I wanted to ask you, the film Stan and Ollie, is that available for these days?
It was on release, I think, about a year ago. I think it did the rounds about a year. Yeah. So I don't know. I presume it would be available on Netflix or whatever. Now I don't know.
Yeah. I actually checked, and it's available on a few of the streaming services that you can just rent them one off for about $4.
Yeah.
So I know Amazon Prime was one, and Google Watch or Google View or something. So you can, if you just Google it, you'll be able to find out where you can watch it for a one-off fee. Yeah.
Look, I'd recommend it because I think, I mean, it's terribly hard to try to reenact characters like that. I mean, any character, try to recreate them for the screen. And I think they do it well. I was quite astonished to watch them, particularly the guy who plays Hardy. And they picked up their mannerisms and their whole appearance, and, you know, just got inside the characters. So it is. I find it quite a remarkable film.
And what about the music in it?
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't have to go back and watch you, because I don't think they. I mean, the music was written specifically for Stan and Ollie. I don't know how much of Shields' music they reused. I'd have to go back and watch, because I wasn't conscious of it while I was watching.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, Cara has something to... Cara, can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Cara, yep.
I wanted to ask two questions. One, did I miss... I had to leave to answer the phone. Did I miss how they ended up as a couple, or is that in the film that you're recommending we watch? Did they end up as friends and compatriots?
Yeah, they were friends. They were friends.
And maintained.
Yeah,
good.
They were friends throughout.
Right.
From their first, teaming up at Hal Roach, they were friends. Yes, they had disagreements, but they were friends.
They overcame them.
Yeah, they did. And in the end, Hardy, after their last tour, had a stroke. He lost his voice, couldn't speak, and he died. Laurel lived on for several years afterwards, and he spent his retirement years crafting Laurel and Hardy gags.
Oh goodness.
Look, can I just read a couple of things? We've got a book here about them.
Can you just show us that book properly?
Yeah, it's Laurel and Hardy, Princes of Comedy, Clown Princes of Comedy. There's a lot of books about Laurel and Hardy. I'm just trying to find. Should have marked it, but
with the apologies, Ray, I have to go now.
Yes, okay.
It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Martha.
I'll have to go in a moment too. So can I ask my second question?
Yeah.
Princes of Comedy.
Yes.
But what would you proportion was the element of bullying within it? Because I, like Martha, as a child, didn't like them because I felt that somebody always came off badly.
Yeah.
And that upset me.
All right. Well, Hardy was always the bully. He was always the heavy, and that was it was the dynamic between the two. And so I think he was meant to play an unlikable character at times, but that was the dynamic. He was the guy who was full of his own self-importance, and he always expected Laurel to follow. And Laurel often didn't realise he was being bullied, but sometimes he reacted, and reacted to that. So
you feel that even though it was comedy, that element of bullying was quite significant?
It was. I wouldn't call it significant, but it was there because it was part of Hardy's character, because he was the dominant personality.
I see.
And so Stan had to react to it, you know, and that's very true to life.
Unfortunately, yes, it is.
Yes.
But it's not good for children to be seeing them, and they were seeing them regularly on a Saturday arvo.
Yeah, well, I was too. I didn't have that reaction. I just loved them.
We grow with what we grow. But thank you. I've enjoyed the afternoon very much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Cara.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
We probably should finish up pretty soon. It's about 3:30. Does anybody else have any questions just before we finish? Okay, I think that would be good to finish now.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for joining in. It's been good fun.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ray.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye now.
Very good.
Bye.
Yep.
Bye.
Thank you.